Our first pillar we're going to talk about tonight is healthy eating for a healthy brain. And can you tell us a little bit more about the role that glucose plays?
Right. So, as I mentioned on the previous slide, is that our brain is a greedy user of our metabolic resources in our body. And so our metabolism basically means how our body uses energy. And that energy is getting supplied by blood, and our brain is using the oxygen and the glucose that is supplied by our blood. So our brain's only source of energy is glucose. So the food that we eat gets broken down into glucose, and the carbohydrates that we eat specifically gets broken down into glucose and is the primary source of fuel for our brain. And it keeps our brain cells alive and functioning. And glucose cannot be held in the brain. There's no reserves of glucose. So it needs to be readily available. All foods eventually break down into glucose for our brain, but carbohydrates that we eat are going to be the most readily available breakdown of glucose. And if you have too much glucose, so too much carbohydrates, too much sugars, then that can actually be toxic to the brain. Not necessarily if you eat, a couple, maybe overindulge in a couple pieces of cake every now and then, not a big deal. But over time, your brain and your body's ability to tolerate those high levels of glucose in your bloodstream can eventually cause a dysfunction. And so, for example, diabetes is a condition where the body is no longer able to break down and utilize an overabundance of glucose in your body, in your bloodstream. So one good way to help regulate your blood glucose and keep them at steady and healthy levels is to eat whole and fresh foods as an optimum source of nutrients for the brain. And the reason why is that whole foods, fresh foods, take longer to break down. And so they serve as a good source of nutrients over time, rather than, say, having a simple sugar like a piece of cake where you get this quick spike of glucose and then it crashes down and can give you kind of a waxing and waning or crashing feeling when you have that drop in your glucose.